Joey, I'm not angry anymore. Angry anymore. Angry anymore. Her voice trailed off. Well, concrete blonde, you're a better person than I, Jimmy Schoenberger remarked, adjusting his tie. Oh, I bet you do, he said as I touched myself by divinals played. Damn, Spot, you're playing some good ones today. And jinxed it. Should have kept my mouth shut, Jimmy muttered as the sign by Ace of Base started. Going with a 90s theme today, huh? You ready? Is Daddy's baby girl ready? Jimmy asked as he lifted Guinevere from her crib. Guinevere giggled and cooed as Daddy tickled her belly. Just before he opened the trailer door, she scrunched up her face, and the unmistakable sound of a wet bowel movement erupted. With a sigh, Jimmy removed his jacket and tucked his tie into his dress shirt. Do not. I mean it. Do not pee on me. We don't have time for, Jimmy said, deftly catching the spray into the fold of her diaper. Guinevere Faye Schoenberger, what did I just say? After cleaning her up and changing her diaper, Jimmy prepared once more to leave the trailer. This time, they managed to get out and into the minivan. You're a pretty girl. Yes, you are. Yes, you are, Jimmy cooed to the blonde child as he secured her into the car seat. Look just like your mother, Jimmy said, planting a noisy kiss on her forehead before closing the minivan's rear door. Jimmy Schoenberger first met Marla Faye Toombs when they both entered Kimball Academy as frightened 8th graders among 40 others in an unfamiliar and intimidating environment. Jimmy's grandfather often reminded him, Babe Ruth struck out a lot more times than he hit home runs. Hi, I'm Jimmy Schoenberger, Jimmy introduced himself with a smile to the beautiful blonde. I'm Marla Toombs. Do you know where room 112 is? The blonde asked. That's the same room I'm trying to find, Jimmy admitted. Come on, let's see if we can locate it together. During lunch, Jimmy and Marla sat together and compared notes. They quickly agreed. Mrs. Niedermeyer was nasty and evil. Mr. Franks was a total jerk. But Mr. Cousins was pretty cool. For their first date, Jimmy's grandfather drove them to the movies. The old man wiped a tear as he watched his grandson and his date holding hands in line to buy tickets. He parked the car, got out, sat on the hood of his 1984 Buick LeSabre, and lit a cigarette. 7 cigarettes later, the 2 kids emerged from the theater, still hand in hand. Did you have fun? The old man asked as Jimmy gestured for Marla to take the rear seat first. Yeah, Marla nodded. Yes, sir, Jimmy replied. Yes, sir, Marla echoed. Jimmy experienced his first kiss outside Marla's kitchen door. He blushed deeply but grinned when Grandpa gave him a thumbs up. I can't. My dad's back, so we're going to that Bricks on 54, Marla explained when Jimmy invited her to go skating. You know, the one where they throw the pizza in the air? When Eldridge and Mitty mentioned they were heading to the go-kart ranch in Pinoak, Jimmy invited himself along. While taking a break in the attached video arcade for a malt, after a few laps around the track, Jimmy spotted Marla with an older boy from Kimball Academy. How was the pizza? Jimmy asked, noticing Marla's face pale. A few minutes later, Kenny Sampson, Marla's companion, approached Jimmy and shoved him. Jimmy's smile seemed to infuriate the boy. Do you really think she's worth losing your teeth over? I'll let you take the first swing, Jimmy said, still smiling. Kenny Sampson, who was 2 years older, 30 pounds heavier, and 6 inches taller, threw a haymaker that missed its mark. After 4 punches, the manager ejected Jimmy, then helped Kenny into a chair. Kenny threw the first punch, Eldridge informed the manager. I did not, Kenny protested, his tongue testing his loose teeth. It's right there on camera, Mitty pointed to the security cameras scattered around the lively room. You approached us. We weren't bothering you. You came up, shoved Jimmy, then tried to hit him. And then he beat the crap out of you, Eldridge chuckled. Made it look easy. Keith Sampson pounded on the door of the trailer. Grandpa emerged, listened to the angry man's demands, then informed him his son had instigated the fight. Not my fault. Not my grandson's fault you raised a little weakling who can't handle himself. Grandpa shrugged. Keith barely managed to crawl to his truck and drive himself to St. Elizabeth Parish Trauma Center. He concocted a story about being attacked by 2 or 3 guys. There was no way he would admit to throwing the first punch, let alone being beaten by a 70-year-old man with a prosthetic leg. Look, I'm only 13. We don't need to get so serious, Marla remarked at school on Monday. And you could have just said that instead of lying to me, Jimmy responded. But don't worry about us getting too serious. I don't date girls who sneak around behind my back. Over the next few years, Jimmy remained polite and civil whenever he crossed paths with Marla in their small high school. However, he didn't ask her out on any more dates. He did have a few confrontations with Kenny, whom Marla paid little attention to, much to Kenny's resentment. Their final altercation saw Kenny enlisting Doug Bursagay's help. 2 against 1, Kenny gloated. Uh-huh, Jimmy smirked, kicking Doug to the ground. While Doug curled up in pain, Jimmy proceeded to break Kenny's nose, jaw, 4 ribs, and left hand. He warned them both that next time he wouldn't show such mercy. Hey, Jimmy, Marla really likes you. Jenna West, a cute red-headed cheerleader, cooed and giggled as Jimmy warmed up with the football team. Good to know, Jenna, Jimmy replied, starting his wind sprints as Coach Statler blew his whistle. By the time homecoming week arrived, Marla and her friends had effectively discouraged any girl from going to the dance with Jimmy. A few cheerleaders hinted that Marla wanted him to ask her to be his date. That's okay. I'm not going, Jimmy responded. Marla herself cornered Jimmy, pleading her case. She reminded him that their disagreement had been 4 years ago, when they were both 13. Now, at 17 and juniors in high school, she felt they had both grown up. She confessed missing their friendship. I mean, I'm sure you remember our first day. God, I was so scared. And then this really cute boy came up. Marla's eyes brimmed with emotion as she reminisced. They double-dated with Brianna, Marla's cousin, and Sandy, Brianna's boyfriend. Grandpa had snorted, but forked over the money for Jimmy's half of the limo rental and threw in $100 for dinner and a few pictures. Knock 'em dead, Tiger, Grandpa said when the limousine pulled up in front of their trailer. And after dinner and the dance, the 4 decided to go to Marla's house. Her parents weren't home. Jimmy was fine with this. They were having a good time. And he was with the prettiest girl in their high school. He was with the prettiest girl he'd ever known. The moment they entered the home, Marla and Brianna raided the liquor cabinet. Jimmy was no prude. He'd tried liquor on a few occasions. He did like achieving that perfect medium, that space between sober and falling down, knee-walking drunk. That happy, carefree, pleasantly buzzed place, right in the middle of the 2 extremes. Returning from the bathroom, Jimmy walked into the living room and saw Marla and Sandy kissing. Jimmy saw Sandy's hand playing with Marla's breast, and Marla trying to work the top of her gown down. Hey! Brianna cheerfully greeted Jimmy, her gown already crumpled on the floor. Jimmy said nothing. He walked to the front door of the house and left. A few moments later, Sandy, Marla, and Brianna drove up, Sandy driving Garrett Toombs's car. Marla and Brianna tried to talk Jimmy into returning to Marla's home. Sandy called Jimmy a few names. Shut up, Sandy! Marla screamed at the smirking boy. Jimmy, please, please come back. I'm sorry. We were just fooling around. Brianna was right there. We were just playing. Jimmy, please, please don't, Marla pleaded, aware of Jimmy's temper. That night, Marla ended up with her first DUI while driving Sandy to St. Elizabeth Parish Trauma Center. Sandy broke up with Brianna and steered clear of Marla. The Toombs girls seemed more trouble than they were worth. Grandpa did like the photo Connie Edwards had taken of his handsome grandson and his date. Jimmy and Marla didn't socialize again until the final weeks of their senior year, nearly a year and a half after their disastrous homecoming dance double date. Jimmy remained polite and civil whenever they encountered each other at Kimball Academy, which wasn't a very large high school. Jimmy, the senior prom's coming up in a couple of weeks, Marla mentioned, sitting at Jimmy's table in the library. Must be why Mrs. Cavilion keeps reminding everyone every morning, Jimmy remarked, jotting down notes in his notebook. And, no one's asked me yet, Marla continued hesitantly. Really? You might want to check into that, Jimmy replied, still focused on his thick reference book. Jimmy, please, Marla pleaded. What about Brandon Simoneau? Jimmy asked, setting aside one book and opening another. God, him! Marla scoffed. Jimmy remained silent, gathering the information he needed from his books and closing them with a decisive thud. After shutting his notebook, he nodded politely to Marla and departed from the table, carrying the reference books with him. Jimmy, please, Marla pleaded again later as Jimmy sat down to eat his lunch. Not happening, but thanks for trying. We have some lovely parting gifts for you, Jimmy retorted dryly. Tiffany, tell her what she's won. Sure thing, James, Jimmy continued in a mockingly exaggerated voice. Marla Toombs, you've won a lifetime supply of Eat Shit and Die for the perfect combination. Try Eat Shit and Die with your favorite flavor of Go Fuck Yourself. Marla's eyes welled with tears, and she hurriedly left the cafeteria. Jimmy noticed a few staff members glancing in his direction, so he innocently shrugged at them. After school, Jimmy visited the St. Elizabeth Parish Trauma Center and entered Grandpa's room. Finding Grandpa asleep, Jimmy settled in and began working on his homework. A nurse eventually entered to check on the patient's vitals and managed to wake him. Hey, the old man wheezed. Hey, Grandpa, Jimmy replied with a smile. Grandpa listened attentively as Jimmy recounted the day's events, including Marla's plea for another chance at a date, which Jimmy saw as a potential betrayal. Nodding understandingly, Grandpa raised his hand, signaling Jimmy to stop speaking. Just be sure to use a condom, Grandpa said solemnly. Don't need a condom, not getting anywhere near that crazy girl, Jimmy retorted. No one said you have to date her. Look, take her to this damn prom, have some fun in the back seat, get it out of your system, then drop her off in the middle of the Atchafalaya, okay? Grandpa suggested with a mischievous glint in his eye. Devious, Grandpa? Jimmy grinned, and Grandpa managed a weak smile. Seriously, boy? How long have you been hung up on this girl? Grandpa asked pointedly. Not hung up on... Jimmy started to protest. Bullshit. What about that Bethany girl, or Keandra? She was a cute one. And Candy? Thank goodness you moved on from her. All she did was complain, Grandpa interrupted. So, what should I do? Jimmy asked. Just take her to the prom, have your fun, get it out of your system, and move on, Grandpa advised. You'll see, reality rarely matches the fantasy. Then you can forget about her and find someone who truly makes you happy. The next morning, as Jimmy packed his books into his locker, Marla whispered, Jimmy, I know. Okay, Jimmy agreed firmly, but we're not double dating with any of your friends, cousins, or neighbors. Whoa, Marla squealed excitedly and impulsively hugged and kissed Jimmy. Miss Toombs, Mr. Cousins warned with a hint of amusement in his voice. Yes, sir, Marla replied, darting off to boast to her friends about her senior prom date. I was right, Grandpa guessed, shifting his oxygen mask aside as a weary Jimmy entered the ward. Jimmy had rented a tuxedo for the occasion and bought a beautiful corsage from Annie's Floral Designs. Hanging Gardens in LG provided a supposedly authentic Thai cuisine. Connie Edwards snapped a few photos of the smiling couple, and they were nominated for Prom King and Queen before joining their friends and classmates in the festivities. Once again, Marla's parents were absent. She wasted no time in pouring them both hefty glasses of Albertson's gin mixed with liqueurs. Half a glass into her drink, Marla shed her expensive evening gown, letting it pool on the living room floor. Marla gazed deeply into Jimmy's eyes, silently mouthing, I love you, as she wrapped her legs around him. She cheerfully encouraged him to enjoy himself. In the morning, Marla escorted the tired Jimmy to the door, still dressed only in her high-heeled pumps. Without hesitation, she opened the front door, gave him a passionate kiss, and sent him off into the early morning air. I was right? Grandpa asked again. I suppose, Jimmy replied with a tight smile. Need anything? A pack of Winstons and a can of St. Elizabeth's lager, the old man requested. 4 days later, Jimmy laid his grandfather to rest. He placed an unopened can of St. Elizabeth's lager in the casket and slipped a pack of Winstons into the man's shirt pocket. Attempting to say, I love you, Jimmy broke into sobs instead. I'm so sorry about your grandfather, Marla whispered sympathetically as Jimmy arranged his books in his locker. Thank you, Jimmy responded numbly. Remember how he took us on our first date? Marla reminisced, smiling as she wrapped her arms around Jimmy's right arm as they walked from locker to home room. That afternoon she showed up at his trailer, and they spent an intimate time together in bed. Jimmy's academic performance was average at best, Without his grandfather's guidance, encouragement, and occasional bribery, Jimmy lacked motivation to pursue higher education. He found employment with Robichaux Contracting, where he excelled at heavy lifting. Paul Robichaux recognized Jimmy's potential and began mentoring him in sheetrock work. 2 months after Jimmy buried his grandfather, Marla showed up at the trailer, barely containing her excitement. Jimmy hadn't seen her since their graduation from Kimball Academy, and he wasn't pleased to see her now. "Guess what? I'm pregnant, Daddy," Marla announced cheerfully. "You conniving bitch," Jimmy hissed, his anger boiling over. "You sabotaged those condoms." "You can do a DNA test if you want," Marla continued, oblivious to Jimmy's fury. "But we both know what it's going to show." "You deceitful bitch," Jimmy snarled, punching the wall in frustration. Garrett Toombs arrived soon after to confront Jimmy. His daughter was pregnant, and she claimed Jimmy was the father. Jimmy didn't deny it, meeting Garrett's blustering demands with a blank stare. "What are you going to do about it?" Garrett demanded angrily. "Are you going to step up? Are you going to do the right thing?" "I'll pay my share, half of the medical bills, half for food, half for diapers," Jimmy stated plainly. "No, you're going to do a lot more than that, you little prick," Garrett thundered, grabbing Jimmy by the shirt. "I can make the next one really count," Jimmy said calmly, as Garrett struggled to catch his breath. "Now, as I was saying, I'll pay half, but I will never, ever marry that drunken, easy girl. Got it?" "Call my little—" Garrett wheezed, his face red with anger. Jimmy delivered a sharp slap to the man's face. "Understood?" "Hey, loser," Kenny Sampson taunted as he crossed paths with Jimmy in the lobby of First de Garde's bank. "Hey." Jimmy nodded, indifferent to Kenny's taunts. "Heard the news?" Kenny continued while the cute teller motioned for Jimmy to approach. "Heard I don't give a damn?" Jimmy replied, flashing a smile at the attractive teller. "Hi, need to deposit this, please." "Marla and I? We're getting married," Kenny boasted. "Congratulations," Jimmy shrugged. "Hold on, give me a couple of minutes. I'll see if I can find anyone who gives a damn." "What's the matter, loser? Can't handle losing your woman to a real man?" Kenny sneered. "Yeah, that must be it, huh?" Jimmy laughed sarcastically. "You heard?" Marla asked, dropping by with a receipt from the doctor's office. "You know, I don't think I like Dr. Sweetman very much. He rushes you in, rushes you out, and doesn't tell you anything." "What's that?" Jimmy said casually, tapping away on his cell phone to pay his share of the OBGYN bill. Kenny Sampson. He asked me to marry him," Marla said, fidgeting with a button on Jimmy's shirt. "Oh yeah? Good for him," Jimmy replied, gently guiding Marla out of the trailer. 3 hours later, a drunken Marla was pounding on his door, screaming and crying. Jimmy reluctantly let her in, and she lashed out at him with her fists. "Damn it! Kenny Sampson's going to marry me, and you don't even care!" she wailed bitterly. "Nope, not one bit," Jimmy agreed coolly, trying to calm Marla down. "I hate you so much," she sobbed bitterly. "Likewise," Jimmy smirked. "Are you really going to let me marry that Kenny Sampson?" Marla asked tearfully. "Yeah," Jimmy said nonchalantly. "Why not? If he's willing to marry you, go ahead." "I need to stop by. I have some receipts for maternity clothes," Marla informed him a few days later. "Maternity clothes? That's your problem, not mine," Jimmy retorted. "Get Kenny to pay for that stuff. As for me, I couldn't care less what you wear." Jimmy tossed the wedding invitation into the trash. Keith Sampson had kept a safe distance from Jimmy, warning him of dire consequences if he dared to show up at the church. Jimmy smirked, but assured him he had no interest in spoiling his son's big day. "Your son's foolish enough to marry that easy girl? Good luck to him," Jimmy thought, giving the enraged father a cheerful middle finger. "My wedding is tomorrow," Marla informed Jimmy, handing him more bills. "Yeah?" Jimmy replied casually, processing another payment on his cell phone. "Unless you—" Marla hinted, hiking up the hem of her short skirt. "Forget it, Marla," Jimmy cut her off. "I don't like you, and I sure as hell don't love you." They ended up making love on the kitchen table. "You bastard!" Marla screamed at him as she stormed out of his trailer. "Why, yes, I am," Jimmy laughed, raising a toast to her departure with a sip from Grandpa's Iron Barrel whiskey. "And you're the best interesting time in bed I ever had," Jimmy drunkenly proclaimed to the empty trailer a few hours and several glasses of whiskey later. "Jimmy, Marla sobbed into his voicemail the next afternoon. "I love you." "Uh-huh," Jimmy muttered, but he didn't delete the message. Kenny was livid when he discovered Jimmy's passion mark on his new bride's breast. Marla tried to convince Kenny that it had been a prank, insisting it happened at her bachelorette party. She claimed that when she'd passed out from all the champagne, one of the bridesmaids had given her the mark as a joke. "Oh, yeah? Know which one it was?" Kenny demanded. "Probably Shelley," Marla suggested, naming Shelley Cronauer, the tall butch bridesmaid. "Yeah, probably her," Kenny grimaced. During their honeymoon in New Orleans, Marla emptied the minibar in their room, leaving them with an exorbitant bill. She also drank at several bars in the French Quarter, prompting Kenny to get into a few fights when Marla flirted with men who were willing to buy her drinks. Upon returning home, Marla promptly got her third DUI, totaling Keith Sampson's brand-new Chevy Silverado. She had taken her father-in-law's truck because Kenny had wisely hidden the keys to his Malibu from her. Scouring online listings, Jimmy found Amelia Waters, an attorney specializing in children's rights and protections. At Marla's DUI arraignment, where she appeared with her broken leg propped up, Amelia Waters made her presence known. "Your Honor," Amelia called out, stepping forward after Marla's court-appointed attorney entered a plea of not guilty. Amelia Waters, representing the unborn child's father. "Jimmy," Marla giggled happily, "I knew you'd—" "Wait, what? What the hell?" Marla screamed, realizing Jimmy wasn't there to rescue her. "How far along is she?" Judge Jesse Johnson inquired, addressing the public defender. "He's asking you," the lawyer snapped, jabbing Marla's shoulder. June 11th. 5 months," Marla replied, glaring at the attorney. "Remanded to CDU for their 90-day program, then house arrest until she delivers the child," Judge Jesse Johnson declared, banging the gavel. "You can't be serious," Marla gasped, horrified. The public defender was already focused on her next client, and a bailiff gently wheeled Marla's wheelchair aside. "I hate you!" Marla screamed at Jimmy as he and Amelia huddled, discussing matters with a very sullen Kenny and bitter Keith Sampson. "Ditto," Jimmy replied coolly, then turned his attention back to Kenny's persistent demands for a DNA test on the fetus. Less than 3 days after being remanded to DeGard CDU, Marla was asked to leave for engaging in intimate activities with 2 male patients and a female intern. Kenny erupted in anger when the DNA test confirmed Jimmy as the father, but Marla cozied up to him, claiming she genuinely believed Kenny was the father. Marla's house arrest was swiftly revoked when she was caught attempting to shoplift a bottle of Nulos chocolate-flavored vodka from Burns & Burns grocers. Keith discreetly advised his son to cut his losses and part ways with Marla. "I mean, son, you're still paying me back for that hotel bill, not to mention that engagement ring," Keith reasoned. When Jimmy visited Marla in DeGard lockup, she professed her undying love. Jimmy let her speak for a few moments before cutting her off abruptly. "I'm suing you for full custody," Jimmy declared. "Full custody? Full custody of what?" Marla asked, genuinely baffled. "Full custody of what? Jesus, Marla, how many brain cells have you fried?" Jimmy retorted. "Full custody of our baby, eh?" "Well, you can't have it," Marla spat venomously. "I'd rather kill the baby than let you have custody." "What? You think they'll let you keep the baby in here?" Jimmy scoffed. "No, my husband," Marla said, smirking as she emphasized the word husband. "Kenny will take care of him or her." "Marla, for God's sake, wake up," Jimmy said. "Kenny wants nothing to do with the baby. It's not his." Through his attorney, Amelia, Jimmy was indeed granted full custody. Marla was stunned. She had truly believed that her dupe, her drone Kenny Sampson, would fight for full, or at least shared custody. Kenny hadn't even shown up for the hearing. "What about my parents? They should have full custody," Marla pleaded with the judge. "Seeing what a great job they did raising you?" Jimmy sneered. "I'll kill it," Marla threatened. "Which is why we filed an injunction," Amelia informed Marla. "Jimmy, please." Please don't do this to me, Marla sobbed as a DeGard police officer led her out of the courtroom. Jimmy, please don't leave me. Please don't leave me. Jimmy. The door closed on her anguished scream. Jimmy? That was painful? Amelia suggested. Yeah, the first 100 or so times you hear it, it kind of is, Jimmy agreed. After that, it's almost like you don't hear it at all. Guinevere Faye Schoenberger was born 7 weeks premature. When Marla screamed she was in labor, the guard didn't believe her. Fortunately, the ambulance arrived quickly and whisked Marla to St. Elizabeth Parish Trauma Center. Marla didn't wonder if the maternity nurses had ever seen a patient in an orange jumpsuit before. She wailed, sobbed, sweat, and cursed Jimmy Schoenberger, her parents, Kenny, anyone she could blame for her misery. You're the one who poked holes in the condom, Jimmy reminded her as he stood in the delivery room. Fuck you, Marla hissed hatefully. You did, and here we are, Jimmy said as Marla groaned through another crippling contraction. Guinevere had to remain in the hospital. They wanted her to gain enough weight to reach 5 pounds. With a healthy appetite, she managed that in 6 days. Looking down at her angelic face, with her big blue eyes and little tuft of blonde hair, Jimmy felt both love and fear in equal measures. He felt both huge, all-powerful, and tiny at the same time. Guinevere was 3 months old when Marla was released from jail. Reluctantly, Kenny took his wife back in. She swore she loved him. Upon hearing that Kenny had caved, taking Marla back, Kenny's father was extremely disappointed. Keith let Kenny know he would not bail him out of any trouble Marla might cause. After drinking everything in the trailer, including an old bottle of vanilla extract and a bottle of Listerine mouthwash, Marla called Jimmy. I'm back, Marla giggled drunkenly into Kenny's cell phone. Marla? Jesus God, it's 3:20 in the morning, you crazy-ass bitch, Jimmy sleepily complained. Want to see my baby? Marla demanded. No, Jimmy said and ended the call. Jimmy blocked Kenny's phone number. He sighed and tried to get back to sleep. Guinevere, however, decided Jimmy had slept enough and cried for a diaper change and a bottle. God, bad enough I got one crazy blonde. Jimmy smiled at the beautiful baby. You're telling me I've got 2 of them now? Huh? Daddy's got 2 crazy blondes? A few weeks later, Marla showed up at Jimmy's trailer with a bedraggled blonde girl. The girl's hair was filthy, her skin mottled with scabs from scratching herself raw. She wore a Cabrini Catholic high school uniform, but it was filthy and smelled horrible. Hey, this is my friend, Angela Grenode. Told her we have the most beautiful baby in the world, and Marla enthused. In reality, Marla Sampson and Angela Gernode were not there to see the baby. Kenny had locked Marla out of his trailer, and Keith had refused to let her in his home. Marla's parents had also barred her from entering their house. The true purpose of their visit was to scope out Jimmy's place and see if there was anything they could steal to sell. You don't have a baby? Jimmy said, forcefully shoving Marla away from the door so he could shut and lock it. God damn, just God damn! Jimmy cursed as Marla began hammering on the door. Marla and Angela pounded on the door for a solid 5 minutes. Jimmy called the police, and they sent out a cruiser. When Marla and Angela saw the cruiser turn the corner, they both ran. But by then, the baby had been woken from her sleep and was screaming at the top of her lungs. My lawyer says I need a report to file a restraining order, a tired and frustrated Jimmy said, rocking and patting his daughter. Yes, sir, Officer Leanne Pyle replied. Hi, sweetie, hi. I just love babies. Uh-huh. Everyone says that until it's time to change a diaper. Jimmy smiled at the attractive redhead officer in her snug uniform. That night, Jimmy was awakened by a thunderous boom. His trailer seemed intact, and miraculously, Guinevere slept through the noise. Jimmy stepped outside and looked around at his neighbors' trailers. They all seemed fine. Through the treetops, he saw the light from a fire. Turning on the television, he saw the coverage by Summer Duhan of Performance 12 News. He smiled. He had a big crush on the beautiful blonde reporter. Just as he lay down to go back to sleep, his daughter demanded attention. Wearily, Jimmy got up and prepared a bottle of formula. 7 days after seeing Marla in front of his trailer with her meth addict friend, Jimmy pulled up to a squat building. He checked himself and chuckled as he pulled his tie out from under his dress shirt. Apparently, he hadn't removed it after changing his daughter's diaper. Sliding open the door of the rear passenger seat, he saw that Guinevere was sound asleep. "Perfect," he said softly. "See how long you can stay like that, okay?" Kenny glared with undisguised hatred as Jimmy and Guinevere entered the small room. Keith Sampson looked over and regarded Jimmy with tired eyes. Then, with a shrug, the old man turned his gaze back to the front. Jimmy approached the casket. He knelt and said a prayer for the young mother's soul. Standing, he looked again at the simple casket, feeling a mix of emotions. Jimmy shook his head. Marla would have been outraged at the no-frills casket. She would have been furious that it was closed. She would have wanted everyone to admire her as she lay in repose. But the fire had burned her beyond recognition. For 4 days, they had believed Marla was the daughter of Bobby Broussard, one of the men burned in the trailer. The expensive engagement ring and wedding band clued the investigators in. Brenda Jo Broussard was not engaged, nor was she married. Dental records confirmed the identity of Angela Journeau. Dental records and the inscription inside the wedding band with the date of the wedding identified Marla's body. They continued to sift through the ashes and finally determined that Brenda Jo Broussard had not been among the deceased. "What the fuck are you doing here, Schoenberger?" Kenny demanded through clenched teeth as Jimmy settled himself and his daughter in a vacant pew. "Paying my respects to a former friend," Jimmy said loudly, attracting the attention of the few people in attendance. "Remember? She was the mother of my child." "Kenny," Keith ordered. Jimmy watched Kenny stomp back to where his father sat. Looking around, he deduced that the softly sobbing woman must be Marla's mother. They looked a great deal alike. He recognized Garrett Toombs sitting next to the woman. The man looked much older than the last time their paths had crossed. He just looked gray and wrinkled. Jimmy nodded to the 4 former classmates. "Yeah, Marla, you would have hated this," Jimmy muttered. "Just about no one is here for you." He nodded toward his floral arrangement, placed next to a simpler one that Marla's parents must have bought. Or perhaps the Sampson family had bought the cheap arrangement. His daughter woke up just as Jimmy decided he had been there long enough to pay his respects. When he stood, a few people glanced over at the man and the crying infant. Jimmy gave a slightly apologetic smile and quickly exited the room with his daughter. The men's room had a changing table just inside the first set of doors. Jimmy swiftly changed her diaper, then dug around in his diaper bag to find a warm bottle for her. Leaving the restroom, he found a couch in the funeral home's lobby and sat down. "Got good news and bad news for you," Keith Sampson said, sitting next to Jimmy as he fed Guinevere her bottle. "Yes, sir," Jimmy replied, looking over at the normally antagonistic man. "They grow up," Keith said. Is that the good news or the bad news?" Jimmy asked after a long moment of silence. "Both," Keith said. "By the way, sorry about your grandfather." "Thank you, sir," Jimmy replied. "Shit, sorry about all of this," Keith sighed and got to his feet. "Good luck, son." "Thank you, sir," Jimmy repeated. The visitation had been sparsely attended, and the funeral had even fewer attendees. Jimmy and Guinevere were the first to leave, which left the priest, Marla's mother and father, and 2 teachers from Kimball Academy, one of whom was a cousin to Marla's mother. "Marla, I'm not angry anymore," Jimmy affirmed as he drove away from the cemetery. The end author's note. "I write these stories for my pleasure. I post them here for your enjoyment. I thank you sincerely for reading my stories. I especially thank those who take the time to leave comments, good and bad. I also appreciate those who rate my works and those who favorite my words. Have a swell day. And some of you have a swollen day."